Hi, I'm Donna Jordan from Jordan Fabrics. Today, I'm going to show you how to make a quilt called Tea Time. Now this is a free pattern and I've made it several times before because it's a really cool quilt to make. There's no background fabric, there's no accent fabric. You can make all of the patchwork with just one jelly roll. Now the quilt here, it's going to finish 55 by 63 inches and you're going to need 40 jelly roll strips. Now the free pattern, it's just one page, but if you're going to make the quilt at home, I would recommend that you get the pattern because it's a little bit easier to follow the written instructions than to just listen to the words I'm saying out loud. So if you want the pattern, it's the first link right below the video. So the first thing I'm going to do is get the strips out of the package here. And to make the quilt, we are going to be putting the strips into groups of 5. And I want to have each group be a mix of colors. So I'm going to use maybe a green and a blue and a pink. So I've got all the strips laid out here. And I've got 8 different groups and each one has 5 strips. So we're going to take the first one right over to the sewing machine. All we have to do now is sew all of these side by side. So I'm going to take the first 2 here, put the raw edges even, and stitch a 1/4 inch away. Now it's important that you don't stretch either the top or the bottom strip when you're sewing. If you don't stretch, your strip unit will come out nice and flat. If you pull the top one or pull the bottom one, it'll distort a little as you sew it. So try to pull a big long piece of it here, put the strips together, don't stretch, and stitch all the way down the one side. Now once you sew off the end, we want to finger press the seam. So I'm going to open this up, and it's easiest to have that seam allowance going to the right. So I'm going to pull this apart with my hands here, and I'm going to draw my fingernail or even the pad of your finger right down that seam. So I'm opening it up like this and then finger pressing all the way down. This step helps so much. It just makes all the other steps much, much easier. So don't skip this one. Now grab the 3rd strip, open it up, and do the same thing. Stitch it onto one side. Again, don't stretch any of the strips. So this is my 5th strip. I just stitched each one on using the exact same method, and I'm going to now finger press this last seam to the right. Now we've got 5 strips into a flat strip unit, but we need to make a tube out of this. So I'm just going to put these 2 corners together, and it helps if you pull it up and kind of hang it in the air here. Match up those 2 corners, and we're going to stitch this last seam here. So we're going to have a great big strip tube. There is our first tube. So it's made up of strips. It's a great big tube. So go ahead and do that with all of your other strips. Once you have all that sewing done, we are ready to cut these up into our blocks. Now I'm not going to iron this because I've finger pressed it and it's laying nice and flat. But if yours isn't quite this flat, you can go ahead and press it a little bit. To do the cutting, I'm going to use something called the strip tube ruler. I don't use a lot of specialty rulers, but I use this one a lot. You don't have to have it, but it makes the pattern cut more quickly and more accurately if you do. So I'm going to take the 7-inch line on the ruler And I'm going to put the line on the stitching line, not on the cut edge of the fabric, on the stitching line. Hold it down, make one cut there, move the tube away, and another cut there. Now we are going to flip the ruler around and put the 7-inch line on the fold. So we'll line it up there. And now I'm going to make this cut here. And I'm going to continue flipping the ruler around and cutting all the way down the tube. Now what we have is two different blocks. This block has a strip in the middle, and this block has a seam in the middle. Now this is very important. When you cut your second strip unit, it's going to be laid out opposite to the first one. So the first strip unit we cut with the seam on the bottom here. With this one, I'm going to do the fold on the bottom, but I'm going to cut the triangles exactly the same way. Now you're probably wondering why we need to lay out the second strip differently, since we're still going to get the same cuts for the blocks. And that's because this first strip, we got 4 of these blocks that had the seam in the middle, and we got 3 of the blocks that have the strip in the middle. Now when we cut this second strip unit here, it's going to be the opposite. We're going to get 4 blocks with the strip in the middle and 3 with the seam. So we're going to end up with exactly half one way and half the other way. And that's what we need to make the quilt correctly. Now I've made this quilt a couple times, and one time I didn't do that step, and I ended up with a bunch more of one kind of block than I had of the other, and I couldn't lay out the quilt very nicely. So be sure to not skip this step. Now for the blocks with the strip in the middle, I'm just going to iron it flat. And for the blocks with the seam in the middle, we're going to open that up. Keep that seam pressed to one side. It doesn't matter which side. I'm going to press it towards the darker fabric. Give it a little press, and then trim off any dog ears you have. So that's these little corners here. The quilt lays a lot flatter if you trim any of those off. Now we're ready to lay out the quilt. So I'm going to take all of the blocks that have the seam, and those are going to be going in every other position. So I'm probably going to have to trade around when I'm done, but if I just take all of these blocks and make a checkerboard style, they're all facing exactly the same way. All of the seams are going this way throughout the quilt. So you can see now all of these are facing that direction, and the quilt is going to be 7 rows wide and 8 rows long. Now we're going to take the other block, and these are all going to be heading diagonally in the opposite direction. So I'm just going to sprinkle the colors throughout here and fill in all these empty spots. Okay, I've got the whole quilt laid out, and I'm just going to sew each row separately and sew the rows together. Now, the nice thing about this quilt is when we sew these together here, none of the intersections are going to match at all. So I'm just going to be able to put these right sides together and not have to worry about matching anything at all. So I'll make each row, put those seam allowances to the right, make the next row, put these seam allowances to the left, and then sew all the rows together. I've got most of the rows sewn together, and I will often do a quilt in 2 halves. That's what I did here. I made half of the rows and sewed them together. The other half, it's over here on the machine. Got a little more sewing here. And I always finger press each row as I sew it on. So I want the row going to the right. Now with this pattern, these are all bias edges, and I can't finger press really hard because I will stretch the fabrics. So I'm just kind of smashing it here. I can feel that it's going to the right, and I'm just going to smash it all the way down. And that's what I did when I put all my rows together. These are not ironed, they're just simply finger pressed, but not stretched. Now at this point, I'm going to take it over to the ironing board. Now this is easiest to iron from the back. The thing we want to be careful of is to not stretch it or smooth it this way. We want to do it on the diagonal. So the first thing I'm going to do is just kind of pat these seams down here, and then these here are going to go that way, and this one's going to go flat here. So I'm not really moving anything. I'm just taking my iron and making sure everything gets kind of flat. Because it's finger pressed, it already wants to lay the correct way. But I'm not going to try to stretch it or anything. I'm just simply going to pat it down. All right, we've got everything pretty much laying down the way we want it to go. And now I'm going to flip the whole thing over. And now I can steam press it. But as I do that, I'm only going to smooth it out along the diagonal. This will keep it from getting distorted. So it's okay to press like this, because I'm going with the straight grain of the fabric. But if you try to stretch it this way or smooth it this way and this way, you will distort each one of the blocks and the quilt will get ripply. We don't want it ripply, we want it nice and flat. See how flat it's laying? That's because I haven't stretched it at all. I just patted it flat and then smooth it along the diagonal of the quilt, which is the straight grain of the fabric. Now when we sew the borders on, we have to be a little bit careful because the edges of all the patchwork are biased, and we have to be a little careful we don't stretch it when we sew it on. But before we get to that point, I've got a difficult decision to make here. The pattern calls for 2 borders. I know I want to use this on the outside because it's got a lot of those bright colors in it. But I can't decide if I want to use green first or pink first. Either one will work successfully. I really think the green just looks a little bit better. Now, if you like the pink better, leave me a comment and let me know. So here's how to make sure your borders stay nice and flat. I've stitched them all into one long piece. And I'm going to go up somewhere near the middle of the quilt here, not on the very edge, just somewhere in the middle. I'm going to line the border up on the edge there. And I'm just going to smooth it out across here. And I'm just going to cut it even with this edge. Now, the easiest way for me to cut it straight is to fold it so that the fold is even with the edge. Then I can pick it up, put my scissors in there, snip it off. Now I'm just going to move this down to the bottom, pin it in a couple of places, and stitch it on. And that will make sure that as I'm stitching, I don't get extra border along there, and then it won't ripple. I've got the borders on the quilt, and it's all loaded up on the machine. The next thing we need to do is pick a thread color. Really, almost any thread color is going to look good on here. I don't think any of these are going to show very much. The pattern is so busy, it would be hard to get a thread that would fight with it. I think I'm going to go with the green because I've got a lot of green in that border, and I've got green in this border, and that should look really good. Now, a lot of people like very simple quilting on their patchwork, and this is one of the simplest patterns here. It's just a very simple meander. It's just going to fill in all of the space. The quilt is all done. I just couldn't be happier with it. It's a very cheerful, bright color combination. I love this big border with the sunflowers. That little teeny green pulls out the green. And I decided to use that bright pink on the binding. That looks really good for binding. So remember I told you, you don't have to match anything here. but we do get a nice pattern of X's here. And look at these, we get big triangles, medium triangles, and then little teeny triangles. And it'd be really hard to make those if we had to cut those little pieces out, but because we used strip units, we have all these cute little triangles. Now, I used the pink on the back. You can see that meander stitch because I've got the green contrast color thread showing on there. Nice, fast, fun project to make a really nice throw size blanket. So because I have them done, I can show you other colors in this pattern. So here's a little bit darker. I mean, it's bright colors, but there's no real lights in it. And this has a lot of quilting. So the quilting is very dense. You can see it all over everywhere, but it doesn't take away from the pattern. I don't know if we can see it from the back. You can probably see just a lot of quilting, whereas this has much less quilting. Both quilts still look really good. And then here's one made with a jelly roll that doesn't have a lot of color change. All the strips are green. And it makes a very relaxing, pleasant looking quilt. It's been hanging up in my shop, so it's all been bunched up here. It's not very flat any longer. There we go. But this is all shades of green, and that makes a really, really nice quilt. So this is just a versatile pattern that can be done with a jelly roll that has a lot of different colors or is all in one color like the green one here. Thanks for watching our tutorial today on how to make the tea time quilt. We hope you enjoyed it. And if you have any other questions, any questions that I didn't answer during the video, leave them in the comments below and I'll be sure to get back to you. Now, at the end of every video, we do a giveaway. So today we're giving away a quilt called Trellis. This was just a lot of fun to make. It was done with layer cake squares. All those flowers, they just look so happy and fun. Nice little 1930s prints in it and on the back. And it's very, very easy to enter the giveaway. There's nothing special or fancy. You just have to go to the link below that says giveaway and put in your email address and your name. And remember, we can send the quilt to anybody who wins anywhere in the world. So good luck. Now, if you like our tutorials and you want to support us, the best thing you can do is subscribe to our YouTube channel. That would really help us out. Happy quilting.